Welcome, everybody. We're just having one small glitch with the speaker, but we will be getting started in just a minute.
Yes, thanks everyone for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Barbara Beckert with the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition. Thank you to members of the media and to our speakers for joining us today. Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities coordinate our coalition, and Jenny Neugart and I will be moderating the briefing. We are recording the event, and we also have a resource packet for you, and I'm just going to put that link in the chat. So here we go. So our coalition provides education and assistance to individuals with disabilities and older adults to promote their participation in the electoral process. DRW also has a voter hotline. So our concerns regarding these proposals are based on our experience of assisting thousands of voters over the years, and a very diverse group of voters, people who are blind and low vision, people who are hard of hearing and deaf, people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, mental health disabilities, complex medical needs, and chronic health conditions. In addition, many older adults have disabilities acquired through aging, although they may not formally identify as a person with a disability. Today, we are sharing our concerns and asking policymakers to slow down the legislative process and not advance bills we are very concerned about: SB 204, 205, 206, and 209. I think it's noteworthy that 3 of these bills failed on a vote in the Senate Elections Committee, and that Senator Bernier, a former municipal clerk with years of experience in election administration, voted against these bills. Just yesterday, new amendments were introduced that we haven't even had time to assess yet, and that they'll be voting on today on the legislative floor. So we're asking policymakers to take a pause and not advance changes that could create new barriers and impact the voting rights for hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites with a disability and older adults, and could potentially impact all voting age Wisconsinites, 4.5 million people. These bills are not ready for prime time. Today, our legislators will consider a number of bills that would put in place new barriers and restrictions. The voters we assist cherish their right to vote, but many experience significant barriers: lack of transportation, difficulty obtaining photo ID, limited or no access to the internet, and inaccessible polling places. I'm going to briefly walk through our concerns about the bills, and then I'm going to turn it over to the people who really are the experts, the individuals who are on the front line experiencing these barriers. So the bills we're most concerned about, SB 204 and SB 206, those would virtually eliminate the option for indefinitely confined voters to receive an absentee ballot for every election. They would require all indefinitely confined voters to provide a photo ID with their absentee ballot request, although that might be amended. The bill also discriminates by age, with harsher restrictions for voters with disabilities under age 65. In addition, any Wisconsin resident who wants to vote absentee would need to apply for an absentee ballot for every election instead of making one application a year. Last year, that would have meant 4 elections or 5 elections for some people. SB 205 would make it harder to vote for many voters who live in nursing homes and group homes. It would restrict staff members from offering information about voting. Based on federal law that requires nursing home staff to affirm and support the right of residents to vote. The language has been modified. However, we're already hearing from care facility staff that they are confused and frightened by the threat of criminal penalties and unwilling to take the risk of helping residents with voting. Current law already makes it illegal for any person to assisting an elector to request, suggest, or seek to persuade an elector to cast a vote for or against any candidate, party, or question. That's 6.824 in Wisconsin statutes. And current state statutes, as well as federal law, provides for voters who need assistance to vote by reason of disability or inability to read or write to be given assistance by a person of the voter's choice other than their employer or union representative. Finally, SB 209 limits drop boxes for absentee ballots to one that's attached to the building where the clerk's office is located. The amendment would expand this to 3, but still does not allow local governments the flexibility to meet the diverse needs of their residents. It is a positive that this bill requires ADA accessibility of drop boxes. We're glad to see that provision included. So while amendments have slightly improved some bills, we are asking policymakers to slow down the process, include stakeholders, and instead consider recommendations for legislation that will protect the rights of people with disabilities and older adults and address accessibility barriers. Our recent report, Getting There is Half the Battle, Wisconsin's Photo ID Law, Access to DMV Services, and the Fight for Our Freedom to Vote, gives a number of recommendations that would address these barriers. So thanks again for being with us today. Thanks to our speakers. I'm going to turn it over now to Jenny Neugart.
Barbara. I'm Jenny Neugart. I'm from the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and along with Disability Rights Wisconsin, we oversee the Disability Vote Coalition. So we have some great speakers for you today that are going to talk about their concerns about these bills. But before we do that, I wanted to provide you with some highlights from a survey that we recently did through the Vote Coalition, where we heard from 314 people with disabilities, older adults, and family members to get a sense of how these bills would impact their ability to vote. And this is in the press packet, so you don't have to worry about capturing all these. But some of the highlights were around transportation barriers. So nearly a quarter of people with disabilities don't have a driver's license and say that transportation is a barrier for them to vote already. And a third of them say that they rely on someone else to drive them where they need to go. So one person in the comments said that this will be impossible for my disabled family member to vote, as we do not have public transportation and he will likely never have a driver's license. Another person said our son would not be able to vote without us driving him there. Several people commented that they live in small towns that don't have bus service or even cab service. As far as assistance with voting, 28% said that they did receive help with the voting process, and nearly 3/4 said they would have difficulty voting if their residential staff could no longer assist them. So one person simply said, I probably wouldn't vote if that bill was passed. And another person said, not everyone living in a residential facility have guardians or family members living in Wisconsin. A lot of guardians live out of state and could not assist with voting, which is one of the major points that we've been trying to make. One of the bills has to do with absentee drop boxes. 64% of people with disabilities said that they would have trouble voting if there was only one drop box that had to be attached to the municipal clerk's permanent office building. One person pointed out that it would be even worse than having it at the voting location, because a small town clerk usually works out of their home, which is not a public facility. There's still no transportation, but even if there was, there's no handicap parking, there's no accessible entrance on a private home. And we have heard many instances where people do have to make an appointment and go to someone's home to vote in early voting cases. And someone else commented that people that drive think it's easy for everyone to get a ride. Not so easy in a wheelchair. And then the last area I wanted to comment on was the indefinitely confined. 85% of people with disabilities said that they would have difficulty voting if they had to request a ballot for each election and provide photo ID for indefinitely confined status. Nearly 9 in 10 said they would have difficulty voting if they had to renew their status every 2 years. A lot of that's related to technology. So one person said it's difficult to figure out how to add the photo ID to an online request for an absentee ballot. Another person said, my daughter doesn't have the technology or knowledge to be able to take a photo of her ID and upload it each time. And then the last quote that I think wraps this up nicely is, not only will this bill negatively affect my sons with disabilities, but one of my parents is over 80 years old with a chronic medical condition. She does not have a home computer and could not do any online requests or photo scanning. She has limited access to transportation. These kinds of restrictions take autonomy away from voters with disabilities. Legislators should be working with disability advocates to remove barriers to voting, not make it harder. So again, that was very well said. I will leave those highlights there. And just that final comment that we want to work with policymakers to advance policies that will actually make elections more accessible and inclusive of voters with disabilities. So we are going to move to our speakers, and we are going to start with Dee Her, who is from Sun Prairie, and she's going to share her perspective as an indefinitely confined voter. Go ahead.
Hello there. Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate it. My name is Dee Her. I'm a resident in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. I became, excuse me, I became permanently disabled about 20 years ago when I started dialysis. And shortly after that, I had a severe stroke. And that led to a lot of issues with walking and movement. In 2017, I was put into a coma for about a month. And after waking up from that, I became an indefinitely confined absentee voter. I cannot move very well. I still use a walker some of the time, and the other parts of the time I am in a wheelchair in order to get around. I vote because I feel like I am representing a population of citizens that oftentimes doesn't have a voice, or a voice that is not heard, or is oftentimes overlooked. When we talk about changing policy for indefinitely confined voters, it is people like myself who are ultimately influenced by these new rules. I still have a lot of difficulty walking and moving around. Standing up for long periods of time is difficult for me to do. So simply getting to the polls to vote is hard because sometimes I just can't walk from the car to the door to just simply vote. And realistically, sometimes people will see people like myself who have disabilities, and all manners and common courtesy is thrown out the door. That leads for myself to have a lot of anxiety because, sometimes it's just overlooked, the fact that they just don't know how to treat somebody like me who needs just a little bit more help. So simple things like having assistance to open the door, all of that just gets thrown out the window. Most of the time it's unintentional, but it still happens. And that makes it very difficult to be able to get out and to just get the assistance that I need to simply be able to vote. Another difficulty is that I no longer am able to drive. In the area where I live, there are no bus lines. and whatever cabs that are available, they are not handicap accessible cabs. So if I chose to go to the polling place in order to vote, I would have to find and access a company that had accessible wheelchair accessible vans or whatnot, so that I can get into the car to get there, much less than have to find a way to pay for that. And because I don't live within a major city, finding a company that will come out to me is going to cost an arm and a leg. And on a fixed budget, I just can't afford to simply do that. I've also run into problems with getting a photo ID. Because I don't live close to a bus line or a cab service that is able to drive me out to a DMV to get an ID, it's a lot harder for me to do that. Much less on top of that now, if some of these changes go through, to have to provide my photo ID every single time I try to vote is very difficult. There's just no way I can get out to, photocopy it, or even if to simply upload it would be so much more difficult for me to do. I've voted already. There's already on file a copy of my address and a copy of my ID. And to do it every single time, it's just not necessary. And when I take a look at some of these changes that want to be made for indefinitely confined voters, there are just a couple of things that it's telling me. First of all, some of these changes is telling me that people like myself who are handicapped, who are homebound, that maybe we just shouldn't vote because we are not capable of getting to the polling place. And it's not saying that we aren't capable of voting, just sometimes we aren't able to simply get there. That does not nullify our ability to vote, nor should our vote be nullified because we can't get there to simply vote. And changing the policy so that it becomes harder for us to vote as an indefinitely confined voter is telling me that maybe I shouldn't vote at all. And secondly, changing the rules to affect those who are indefinitely confined, like myself, it's essentially saying that my vote doesn't matter. And that's hard to accept because those people within my my community who are handicapped or homebound or elderly, we are the voice that needs to be heard the most because we are the least represented. Our voice matters. And as a citizen, it's a privilege and a responsibility for me to vote. And to make it harder for me to simply get my vote in is telling me that my vote doesn't matter. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. And lastly, I did not choose to have a disability. I did not choose these handicaps upon myself. And when policies are changed so that it is harder for someone like me to simply vote, that is punishing me for things that are beyond my control. I want to be able to vote. I want to be able to make a difference. And if getting to the polling place is the difficulty, that's just saying that, you know what, it not only does your voice not matter, now you're being punished for something that I just can't help. I mean, it's already difficult enough as it is to kind of deal with the disabilities and the pressures of living as a handicapped person, much less now to have to worry about how to vote and to know that because I can't get there, that my voice just can't be heard. A lot of these changes that policymakers are making, they should be there to help people like me, not to hinder our ability to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Very powerful, and I appreciate you sharing all that information about your situation. Thank you. So we are going to move on to Noreen. Noreen is from La Crosse and has worked in aging for many years and was a caregiver of her mom. And she'll speak about the importance of the indefinitely confined status for older adults and the difficulties many non-drivers experience with obtaining a photo ID for voting.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and speak on behalf of the elderly population. When we were first required to use a photo ID, we had many elderly people who could not get to the DMV to get their voter ID. They also faced difficulty getting their birth certificate. Many of the elderly were born in rural areas. Records were a little different then, and it was difficult to get a hold of the right person. They did not have use of the internet. And some of the offices they had to contact for their birth certificate did not have the option of using the internet to pay for your copy of your birth certificate. There was a time delay because we had to do it through the US mail, mail a request, mail the payment, and then wait to get it back. So timing was really important. And I would like to say this is the population that built this country. They fought in World War II, they raised children, they worked hard, they built the country and the benefits that we enjoy in this country and in this state. Many of the elderly probably just gave up their right to vote, even though voting very important to most of them. But I think they just felt it's too hard, there's too much I have to do. And even though the aging office offered help, people are frequently reluctant to ask for help. They view it as a weakness somehow. So I do think it's important that we not make barriers for the older people to vote. They've earned that right, they respect that right, and they want to be able to make their vote heard. So I would beseech you not to make barriers. In fact, I think we should do the opposite. Make it easier for people to vote. So on their behalf, I just want to ask you to please respect them and respect their right to vote and their wish to vote, and make it easier. Do not pass barriers for this group. So thank you.
Thank you, Noreen. I think it's coming through that, the people that are going to be impacted by these bills really have such a strong desire to vote. It's very important to them. Okay, so next we're going to hear from Adam Sharp from West Bend. He lives in a small group home and will explain why it's so important to have assistance from staff with voting. Welcome, Adam.
Hello, this is Adam Sharp, and my name is Donna Ellenbecker. I am the administrator of the adult family home that Adam lives in. Adam has actually been part of my life for over 20 years now. He came to me in foster care, and I became an adult family home provider so Adam could continue to live in my home. So Adam, what would you like to say about voting? Adam would like to say that he needs help filling out the application. Adam has a form of communication that is somewhat based on American Sign Language, but it is really Adamese So the fact that Adam and I have an over 20-year relationship, I can understand him, and he can, and as he answers questions, as he votes, I can understand Adam better than, say, someone at the polling place, or anyone that may not know Adam regularly. I understand that they say that you should have your family members help you. And that's not always possible. So Adam does not see his family members very often. His mom does not have a vehicle to be able to get here. And, she lives 50, 60 miles away from us. His two sisters have young children, and it just happens that Adam does not see his family very much. And maybe once a year he might see them. Maybe it goes by a year and a half before he sees him, before they see each other. So that's a difficult situation, and you can't assume that everyone has a guardian or a family member that would be readily available to assist in voting. So Adam's an informed voter. I wanted to say that. One of the things, girl with glasses, what girl with glasses? Which one? Work? Mary Beth? A different girl with glasses. About voting. He's had other people help him with voting, and he wanted to say that that's very important to him as well. Ultimately, I think it should be who Adam trusts and who he trusts to make sure that his voice is heard. I'm really proud of Adam. He often, when he first came to me, he would refer to me about everything. When someone asked his opinion about something, and now Adam has opinions. Recently, they had the superintendent of schools for the state election. And Adam said, I don't know who these people are. So we went and we looked at the platform on the candidates' websites. And I read him the platform. And Adam has specific interests. One of the candidates specifically mentioned people with disabilities or students with disabilities. And to ensure that they have a proper education. And that was the candidate that Adam wanted to vote for, because that was something that he feels passionate about. As most voters, they vote on what their interests are and what their passions are. And Adam is an informed voter, and voting is important. When it comes to needing help and needing assistance, I read the ballot to Adam, and he tells me which candidate he wants to vote for. It's Adam's vote, and it's important that Adam be allowed to express what vote he is interested, what person, what candidate he's interested in. And that's something that he does well. Do you have something you want to say about your voting? Do you like voting by mail? No, this was the first time we voted during the pandemic by mail. And I thought that it went well. Adam has a very large wheelchair. And when we go to our small municipality to vote, Adam needs votes where everyone can really see and hear his vote, and doesn't really fit into the curtained off areas because he has such a large wheelchair. I thought that it was nice that Adam had more privacy in his vote, and he wasn't out in the open at the polling place. I thought that was very convenient for him. It concerns me, being a provider, when I hear that there's penalties, in regard to if I assist people in voting. And I've assisted many of my residents, by helping them fill out applications or ballots. That's important. I've helped in regard to downloading his ID and, making sure that he has ID. I've helped Adam to get to the polls. But we had car trouble. with the wheelchair accessible van. And we missed that vote because we got there too late by the time we were able to get the car started and over to the polling place. We missed it by like 5 minutes and the polls were closed. We have a taxi service in our area, but it's not always reliable. And Adam, Adam has a standing reservation to go to church every Sunday. It's if they're here or if they're not here, we're never sure whether Adam's going to be picked up on time. So transportation is also a barrier. So Adam does need assistance voting. Voting is important to him. He's excited. Our whole household is excited when it's voting time, because this is something that adults do to make their voice heard. And people with disabilities want to be able to be heard as well.
All right. Thank you, Adam and Donna. We appreciate that perspective. All right. Our last speaker is Cindy Bentley. And Cindy is from Glendale, and she is a respected leader in the movement of disability rights as the executive director of People First Wisconsin. Cindy, go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to read some things that we wrote. So voting is one of the most important, I forgot the word, well, the rights. It is wrong to try to limit the rights of citizens. Is this measure are passed, you are properly expressing our votes. Many people with disability depend on their peers and family members and caregivers to assist them in assessing and expressing their rights as an individual. Please do not try to silence our voice and limit our presence, our matters of nothing about us without us. So People First, this is another one I wrote up. People First concerns that SB 204 would end the option for, I can't even say that word, but confined voters to receive an absentee ballot. Absentee ballot for every election. Many people with disabilities have very difficult times leaving their homes to go. They may have limited access to transportation, as Adam said, and Donna. Many people don't have access to a computer or a smartphone to request absentee ballot every year upon. So what I want to say in my own words is that to me, it is a civil rights that you have a right to vote. Wherever you vote, your voice is heard. People First, we have members that also can't get to the poll either. And so what I'm trying to say is, please listen. We're not trying to stop you from voting, but you are trying to stop us from voting. And also it is an ADA, to me it's an ADA violation. Means you're trying to, silence people. I've been voting since I was 26. I had to ask my guardian if I could vote. And then the guardian said, yes, you don't need a guardian, so I could be able to vote. Now they changed those rules, so you know. But I'm just really very passionate about people voting, and me too. And my voice is heard, and I'm able to get to the poll, but all through the pandemic, I did it through the mail, and I loved it. And I think I want to continue that. But you people are not giving us the rights to make our own decision. For Adam said it well done. and Donna to how people get to vote, to the polls. You know, he lives farther than I do. I live in the city where I can get to the poll. Some people live out in the country and that, and it takes a while. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is that we and People First and my members do not like that you're silencing my votes or anybody else's votes in our community. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thank you, Cindy. And Cindy represents, there's People First chapters all over the state.
Yeah,
How
we
many
have
are there,
7
Cindy?
Yeah, we have 17 chapters, and I'm the executive director, and I believe everybody should have a voice and vote to how they want to vote.
Yeah,
Long
so
as they're
she's-
voting, because if we do not vote, we cannot complain. And
Right.
that's the truth. So I just wanted to add that. So yeah, so I just wanted to let you guys know that my members vote, and if we have to go to a picket line or something, so we get our voices out, then that's what we're gonna have to do, because I need to vote, and I want to vote for who I need to vote for, and my members need to vote. And don't tell us what we need to do. And also, please don't, it's nothing with us without us. And remember that, please and thank you. And I'm done. Sorry, I had to finish. I guess.
That's all right.
You got me
Thank you,
fired up.
Cindy.
What happened?
All right. Great stories from a wide range of people and what they're experiencing. Barbara, I'm going to throw it back to you for, I think, questions now.
Yes, thank you so much to all of our speakers, Cindy, Adam,
You're
and Donna,
welcome.
Dee and Noreen. We always learn so much from hearing about your perspective and the barriers that you've experienced and the concerns you have about these proposals. So now we're going to open it up for questions. People can either put questions in the chat, or if someone wants to be unmuted to speak, we can do that as well. I know we shared a lot of information, and we'll continue to be open for questions and take a little bit more time for them. Again, I want to point out that we have a press packet that is available, and we've got a link to our new report about the barriers for folks with disabilities, older adults, and other voters to get photo ID. Wisconsin has one of the most restrictive photo ID laws, and because so many people with disabilities are non-drivers and many older adults become non-drivers, having a state ID for voting can be extremely difficult for people, and we don't think people should lose their right to vote as a result of that. So check out that report. It has some solid recommendations to address those barriers. And
So I have a question, Barbara.
of course, Cindy.
So when is the timeline that we will know about what they need to do, what they want to do to try to silence people's voices? Is there a timeline? Are they going to be voting on this? What can I do to have my members, call their legislatures or whatever and let them know that this is not right? So I just need
Good question, Cindy. So today there is a vote in the Senate on 4 of the bills we're especially concerned about, and it's possible that those bills, if they pass, and we're hoping that they don't, but if they pass, they could be messaged over to the assembly and they could vote as well. And then they could go to the governor. And if they do go to the governor, we hope they'll veto them. But what our real hope is that that they won't be passed in the Senate today, and that they'll realize these bills are not ready for prime time. They've been rushed through. They make a lot of changes that are going to impact the voting rights of hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities and older adults, and potentially all 4.5 million Wisconsinites who are able to vote. So we'd like to slow them down. So your members should be making those contacts now. And I think that you may have sent out some of that information to your network, Cindy. So thanks for all you do.
Yeah, I will do that. Me and Aaron will make sure that that gets out, because, you know, it's kind of like they're trying to, you know, silence everybody's. I mean, we work so hard to get people with disabilities to vote, and now they're going to try to take that away from us. It's ridiculous. And whatever else they want to try to take away from people with disabilities. But this voting is very hard. We had people with disabilities not voting for many years. And then we met Barbara and some more good people through the voting coalition, and people got out and started voting.
Thank you, Cindy. We've got a great question from Melanie.
Okay.
He's asking about are there positive changes state government could make to improve the current situation. So I'll share a couple of those, and then I'll open it up to Jenny and our other speakers. So one change we would like to see is to have more requirements for training for poll workers on voting rights for people with disabilities and accessibility requirements. We find that the training as compared to other states for poll workers is very minimal, and there's a lot of variation around the state. We'd like to see a central curriculum that would be consistent and that would address accessibility and voter rights, so we wouldn't have things like a voter who legally is required to request assistance with filling out their ballot being told by a poll worker that unless you fill out that ballot by yourself, you don't get to vote. So those kinds of complaints are not unusual. We also would like to see more funding for oversight of accessibility at polling places and for municipalities to be able to address accessibility concerns such as the lack of a ramp or accessible parking. Those are some of the common concerns we have. We would like to see Wisconsin catch up in terms of providing equitable access to absentee voting for people who are blind or who have other disabilities where they rely on an accessible voting machine. There is no absentee ballot in Wisconsin that people can fill out independently and privately if they rely on assistive technology to vote. So those are all important, as well as the recommendations in our report about DMV access. We've got some ideas for significantly expanding access to DMV. I also think Senator Bernier has some interesting ideas. We've had really good discussions with her about updating the indefinitely confined voter provisions. We agree that it can be confusing to people, and then some updates are needed. So that's one of the reasons we want policymakers to slow down and let's take the time to do it right. And I think she's got some very promising ideas. Jenny, other areas we might want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, those are the ones the coalition are really working on. The only other one I would mention is automatic voter registration is something we'd like to see at some point as well.
Oh, great. Oh, and one other one is we are doing more education about voting rights for people under guardianship. That's an area where there often is a lack of understanding. And we're especially interested in providing training for the legal community to better understand the abilities of people with disabilities so that that can be considered when a guardianship decision is made, because that judge has the ability for the person to retain their voting rights or to lose them. And then we want to educate people with disabilities who are under guardianship, if they have lost the right to vote, how to get that right restored. So thank you, Melanie. Probably more than you bargained for. Well, we'll stick around for a little bit longer in case there are any questions.
Barbara, am I excused because I got to get on another Zoom for Living Well? May I
Of course,
please be-
Cindy, I know you're a busy advocate. so
Yeah, so
Thank you
I'm
for joining
get
us.
on that one, but thank you. I had computer clicks, but it's all good. Thank you. Have a nice day, everybody.
You too.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our speakers and to members of the media for joining us today. A very important day in Wisconsin, and we hope it will be a day when our policymakers listen to the concerns of people with disabilities and older adults and decide to put a pause on some of the bills that would advance such extreme changes and create new barriers to voting rights. And instead, we'd like to work with them on those issues that we just shared that are priorities for our coalition. We all agree we want elections that are well run and that are secure and have integrity. We also need elections that are accessible and inclusive of our community members. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.